What is the soul trying to bring to light beneath the surface of pleasure or need? This approach transforms desire from a force that controls the mind into a message that informs it. By reading the symbolic nature of longing, we begin to dissolve the illusion that we are prisoners of our instincts. We realize instead that we are recipients of an inner communication encoded in the language of Eros. There is a region within the psyche that modern man avoids with great skill and subtlety. It is a place that contains all that he would rather not see in himself: his weakness, his rage, his fear, his forbidden cravings. This is the shadow, the counterpart to the conscious self, composed of the rejected, unacknowledged, and exiled aspects of one's personality. And among the most commonly banished is Eros' sexual desire, particularly in its raw, chaotic, or socially unacceptable forms. When desire becomes unbearable, when it feels irrational or shameful, it is often because it has been driven underground. The ego, in its pursuit of order and virtue, casts out that which threatens its stability. It denies the carnal, the instinctual, the impulsive, believing that to suppress is to master. But what is repressed does not vanish. It merely descends into the unconscious and gathers power. There, in the dark, it merges with other forbidden fragments, becoming part of the shadow. This disowned Eros does not lie dormant. It operates behind the scenes, shaping behavior, triggering compulsions, manifesting in dreams, fantasies, obsessions, or perversions. Because it is unseen, it becomes unmanageable. What we reject in ourselves returns distorted and overwhelming. Thus, the more violently one tries to suppress sexual desire, the more likely it is to erupt with greater intensity and less consciousness. It becomes a haunting presence rather than a known force. The psyche demands wholeness, not moral purity. And so, when desire is cast into the shadow, the psyche suffers. There is disunity between the conscious and unconscious selves. The individual may appear composed on the surface, yet is tormented internally by impulses that seem alien or demonic. In truth, these impulses are not foreign. They are the parts of the self that have not yet been accepted, understood, or brought into relationship with the whole. To confront desire is not to indulge it recklessly, nor to condemn it outright. It is to recognize it as part of the human totality. Repressed Eros is not evil. It is unacknowledged energy. And energy, when trapped, does not dissolve. It stagnates, transforms, or erupts. The shadow becomes dangerous only when it is ignored. The sexual force, when left unconscious, controls the individual precisely because it remains outside the sphere of awareness. Bringing Eros out of the shadow means facing what one has feared to admit. That desire is not separate from the self, but a reflection of it. To look directly at one's own lust, attraction, or deviance is not a degradation, but an act of psychological honesty. The parts of the self that disturb us are not necessarily enemies. They are potential sources of transformation, if only we have the courage to engage them consciously and without moral condemnation. What is not made conscious is lived as fate. Nowhere is this more evident than in the phenomenon of projection, the unconscious act of transferring one's own inner content onto the outer world. Sexual desire, particularly when repressed or misunderstood, becomes a frequent carrier of such projections. The individual believes he is responding to the magnetism of another, but in truth, he is confronting a part of his own psyche reflected back at him in symbolic form. The desired person becomes a screen upon which the unconscious projects images of longing, wholeness, danger, or salvation. The erotic attraction may feel immediate and overpowering, but it is rarely about the actual qualities of the other. Rather, it is about what the psyche sees in the other, often an embodiment of an archetype such as the anima or animus, representing the inner feminine or masculine aspect that remains unconscious in the individual. This projection gives rise to obsession and idealization. One becomes intoxicated not with the person themselves, but with the psychic image they represent. The lover becomes a vessel for the unknown aspects of the self. Thus, sexual desire, when unexamined, is not simply a response to beauty or intimacy. It is the psyche's attempt to reclaim a disowned part of its own nature through the fantasy of union with another. In this dynamic, the illusion of control takes root. The individual feels either mastered by desire or convinced that controlling the external object, possessing them, avoiding them, or dominating them, will resolve the inner tension. But since the true source of the desire lies within, no amount of external control can bring peace. The more one tries to manage the external world to satisfy or suppress the projection, the deeper the internal imbalance becomes. Projection, especially in erotic contexts, provides a temporary sense of wholeness. The other appears to complete us, to awaken something dormant. But this sensation is fleeting because the source of that longing is not in the other. It is in the self's incomplete relationship with its own unconscious contents. As long as those contents remain unintegrated, the individual will move from one object of desire to another, hoping to fulfill a need that cannot be fulfilled externally. To believe that the object of one's desire holds the key to liberation is to remain captive to projection. One becomes entangled in illusions of love, of control, of destiny, while the unconscious continues its effort to be recognized through the guise of romantic or sexual fixation. The more unconscious the projection, the stronger its grip, and the less choice the individual seems to have in the face of it. This creates the false impression that one is controlled by desire, when in fact one is controlled by what one refuses to see within. The psychic energy bound in sexual desire, what the ancients called libido, is among the most potent forces within the human being. Left unconscious, it governs action through compulsion, fantasy, and repetition. But once brought into awareness, this same force can be transformed, redirected, and refined. This process is not one of denial or repression, but of transmutation, a symbolic alchemy by which base instinct is sublimated into creative, intellectual, or spiritual expression. Individuation, the unfolding of the true self through the integration of unconscious material, is the crucible in which this transmutation occurs. It is not the path of morality or conformity, but of wholeness. The aim is not to destroy desire, but to understand its language, trace its roots, and liberate the psychic content trapped within it. Sexual longing, when examined symbolically rather than literally, reveals itself as a carrier of deeper meaning, often a yearning for union with some neglected or undeveloped part of the psyche. In the alchemical traditions, the raw, chaotic matter of the world, the prima materia, was seen as the starting point for the creation of gold. In psychological terms, the unrefined sexual instinct can be viewed as such matter, instinctual, powerful, and deeply connected to life itself, yet requiring transformation through conscious work. The goal is not purity, but integration, a harmonization of instinct and spirit, body and soul. Transmutation begins when one no longer seeks to gratify desire blindly, nor suppress it out of fear or shame, but instead holds it in awareness, suffers its intensity, and asks, what is this energy trying to become? What higher function might it serve? The libido that once fixated on the external object of desire can, through this inner work, be redirected toward the building of the self, the creation of beauty, the pursuit of insight, or the service of something greater than the ego. This redirection does not occur through willpower alone. It requires symbolic insight, emotional honesty, and psychological endurance. One must resist the temptation to collapse desire into action, and instead contain it, hold the tension between impulse and awareness long enough for the unconscious to reveal its deeper purpose. In this tension, something new can be born. Just as heat and pressure transform base elements into precious substances, so too does the psychic energy of Eros, when metabolized by the self, give rise to new forms of expression, clarity, and interior strength. The work of transmutation often involves solitude, reflection, and the willingness to confront painful truths. It demands an abandonment of the pursuit of immediate relief and a turn inward toward the symbolic and imaginal realms. And here, desire becomes not a chain but a signal, an invitation to dialogue with the inner world, to uncover what has been lost, and to participate consciously in the creative evolution of the soul's architecture. Eros, in its truest sense, is not limited to sexual longing. It is the archetypal force of connection, attraction, and psychic union. It moves not only between bodies but between ideas, images, and inner realities. It binds the psyche together and draws the individual toward wholeness. When misunderstood, Eros becomes a tormenting urge. When honored, it becomes a sacred energy that unites the fragmented self. The modern mind often divides itself against desire, imagining a battle between higher reason and lower instinct. But the psyche does not thrive through division. It seeks integration. Eros, though feared or idealized, is not an enemy to be exiled or a god to be worshipped blindly. It is a messenger from the depths of the unconscious, and its power lies in its potential to reveal and reconcile opposing forces within the self. Integration does not mean indulgence, nor does it mean suppression. It means relationship. To integrate Eros is to come into conscious contact with its presence, not as a force to act upon impulsively, but as a symbolic current that informs the direction of one's life. This process involves seeing where Eros has been split off or projected outward, where it has become distorted through shame, fantasy, or compulsion. Once reclaimed, its energy can be consciously engaged, not reduced to a function of gratification, but elevated into the service of meaning, creation, and inner harmony. The sacred nature of Eros emerges not from its ability to pleasure, but from its capacity to transform. It is the vital force that drives the soul toward union, first with another, and ultimately with the disowned aspects of itself. Erotic attraction may begin with the outer other, but it often conceals a deeper longing to rediscover the inner beloved, the lost counterpart within the psyche that has been forgotten or denied. Through this recognition, one does not dissolve desire but deepens it, moving from craving to communion, from possession to presence. This sacred integration requires a symbolic awareness, a capacity to see erotic experiences as reflections of a deeper psychological process. One learns to read desire not only as a call toward the physical, but as a movement of the soul, pointing toward areas of the self that are unlived, unexplored, or yearning to be known. The fulfillment of this desire comes not through conquest or escape, but through conscious relationship with what it represents. To live with integrated Eros is to allow desire to exist within a wider psychic container, to be felt fully, understood symbolically, and expressed creatively. This is a spiritual as well as psychological act, a movement away from domination by instinct and toward participation in the unfolding of the self through intimacy, imagination, and inner connection. The erotic then becomes a sacred force not because it is pure, but because it is whole, because it unites the depths of instinct with the heights of consciousness, and restores to the human soul a sense of unity that neither repression nor indulgence can prevent it, down into the depths and back into the light.